I never thought anything could hurt more than the day I buried my wife. Standing in the icy rain, lowering her casket into the ground, I believed I had reached the peak of human grief. But that day at my villa in Lake Tahoe, when my own daughter looked me in the eye and told me I was no longer welcome in the very home I had built with my bare hands, my heart broke in a way I never imagined possible. The drive from San Diego had always been my sanctuary. 2 hours of winding roads leading me from the chaos of the city into the quiet embrace of the mountains. I'd packed light, a leather overnight bag, my favorite wool coat, and the book my wife used to read aloud every winter. I had imagined 3 days of peace, snow falling outside, the fireplace crackling, maybe a glass of Cabernet in my hand as I let her memory keep me company. But instead, I stepped out of my car and froze. Two silhouettes stood on the upstairs balcony. Kelly had grown up in comfort, shielded from every hardship I endured. She enjoyed the fruits of my labor, but never witnessed the nights I came home too tired to eat, the Christmases I skipped gifts for myself so she could have the bike she wanted, the hospital bills I paid without blinking so she could get braces, glasses, anything. And now, all of it, the villa, the memories, the symbol of Elizabeth's and my life together, was being handed to strangers. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white against the leather. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just tired, I was furious. They thought I was too old, too weak, too sentimental to fight back. They mistook kindness for weakness. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Looking back, I can't pinpoint the exact day when my daughter's laughter changed. It used to remind me of Elizabeth, warm, melodic, the kind of sound that filled a room with light. But somewhere along the way it sharpened. It became clipped, hollow, almost rehearsed. And though I tried to ignore it at the time, I realize now that it was the first sign of a shift I didn't want to see. When Palmer first entered our lives, I told myself to be patient. Every father struggles when another man suddenly becomes the center of his daughter's world. I wanted to give him a fair chance. He was polite enough at first, eager to shake my hand, quick to offer compliments about the villa. But there was something in his eyes, calculating, restless, that unsettled me. I remember one particular evening. I had just finished grilling steaks out on the patio, the scent of mesquite smoke lingering in the air. Elizabeth always loved steak nights. She said it was the one time I looked completely at ease. Kelly sat at the table, her wine glass half full, while Palmer wandered through the living room like he was cataloging inventory. "Nice place you've got here," he said, running a hand along the mantel. "How much do you think it's worth now, with the market the way it is?" I set the platter of steaks down harder than I meant to, the sound echoing across the table. "It's not for sale," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. Palmer smirked, as if I had missed the joke. "Of course not. But you know, sometimes it's smart to think about equity, liquidity, those kinds of things." He poured himself another glass of wine, unbothered by the tension tightening the air. Kelly laughed lightly at his remark, though it sounded forced. "Palmer's always thinking like an investor, Dad. It's just how his mind works." But I noticed the way she avoided my eyes, the way her fingers twisted the stem of her glass. It wasn't just an innocent observation. It was an excuse. That was the first crack. Over time, Palmer grew bolder. He started leaving his shoes by the door, sprawled on my recliner as though it belonged to him, reaching into my fridge without asking. And Kelly, instead of correcting him, began to defend his behavior. "Dad, don't be so old-fashioned," she'd say when I bristled. "Palmer's family-oriented. He just wants to feel at home here." But this was my home, mine and Elizabeth's. Every corner carried her touch, the curtains she'd sewn by hand, the mosaic tiles she insisted on importing from Italy, the garden where she once spent afternoons humming while planting roses. Seeing Palmer carelessly toss his jacket across her favorite chair was like watching a stranger vandalize a sacred space. I swallowed my words more times than I can count. I told myself that silence was the price of keeping peace, that if Kelly was happy, I could endure the disrespect. But each moment dug deeper into me, carving out the man I used to be. One Sunday morning, I found Palmer on the balcony, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. He didn't look up when I stepped outside. "You really should update this place," he said casually, gesturing toward the weathered wood of the railing. "Modernize it. Maybe add a hot tub. Turn it into more of a vacation rental vibe. You'd make a fortune." I clenched my jaw. This house isn't an investment property. It's our family's home. He chuckled without lifting his eyes from the screen. Family changes, doesn't it? Maybe it's time the house reflects that. I felt the blood drain from my face. The audacity of it. The way he spoke as if my years of sacrifice were nothing more than numbers on a spreadsheet. Later that evening, Kelly repeated some of his words back to me, almost like she was testing how they sounded coming from her mouth. Dad, maybe Palmer's right. The villa is beautiful, but don't you think it could be more useful? I stared at her, stunned. My daughter, the girl who once helped her mother choose the lavender curtains for her room, who used to run barefoot through the halls giggling, was beginning to parrot the language of a man who saw no value in memory, only in profit. That night, I lay awake in the master bedroom, staring at the wooden beams Elizabeth had insisted we leave exposed. The house creaked softly around me, as if echoing my unease. I could feel the balance shifting, the center of gravity moving away from me and toward Palmer. I told myself to endure, to stay quiet, to hope that Kelly would come to her senses. But silence has a cost, and every time I bit back my words, every time I forced a smile, I felt the foundation of our family weaken just a little more. Like a house neglected too long, the cracks were spreading, and soon they would split everything wide open. It happened on a Friday afternoon. I had driven up to the villa after another grueling week of managing properties, hoping for the familiar comfort of solitude. The lake shimmered in the distance, a sheet of silver under the fading sun. I carried my bag up the stone walkway, already picturing the fire I'd light, the silence that would cradle me. But before I even touched the doorknob, I heard voices. Laughter, Kelly's laughter. Except it wasn't the sound I remembered. It was sharper now, lined with something I couldn't name. I stepped onto the terrace and froze. Kelly and Palmer stood there in matching white robes, coffee mugs in hand, as though they were the rightful owners. The sight struck me harder than any punch I'd ever taken. "Dad," Kelly said, her voice slicing through the mountain air, "you can't stay here." I blinked, certain I had misheard. "What did you say?" "This isn't your house anymore," she said, her tone as cold as the snow-dusted peaks behind her. "Palmer and I are living here now. You should have called first." The bag slipped from my hand and landed with a dull thud against the flagstone. My chest tightened, my breath caught. "Kelly, this is my villa. I bought it. Your mother and I built this place together." Her eyes narrowed. "That was then. Things are different now." Different, as if decades of sacrifice could be rewritten with a single word. Palmer shifted uncomfortably beside her, his face flushed but silent. He didn't defend me, didn't correct her. He just stood there, letting my daughter's words hang in the air like a noose around my neck. "Kelly, I don't understand," I whispered. "Why would you say something like this? Why would you shut me out of my own home?" She set her mug down, with a sharp clink against the railing. "Because it's not your home anymore. It's ours. And frankly, Dad, you're just in the way." In the way. The words hit me harder than any insult I had ever endured. This wasn't just a house. It was the place where Elizabeth and I had planned to grow old together, where I carried Kelly on my shoulders through the halls, where her laughter once bounced off the walls like music. And now, my only child stood there dismissing me as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience. I tried to speak, but my throat tightened. My hands trembled as I reached for the bag again, my knees groaning with the effort. At 62, I wasn't the strong young man I once was, but I still expected respect from my daughter, if from no one else. But there was none. She looked down at me from the balcony, her face unreadable. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt, maybe even regret in her eyes. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by that hard, unyielding stare. "Fine," I said at last, the words sour on my tongue. It tasted like defeat, like ash. "If that's what you want." I turned back toward the car, each step heavier than the last. Behind me, I heard Kelly's voice again, softer this time, laughing at something Palmer whispered. I forced myself not to look back. But when I opened the car door, curiosity betrayed me. I glanced over my shoulder and caught her raising her mug toward him, as though toasting to her victory. The sight burned into me. By the time I slid into the driver's seat, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the key. I started the engine, the hum of German engineering steady beneath my palms, and stared at the house in the rearview mirror. For the first time, it no longer felt like mine. As I pulled away, the snow began to fall, light at first, then heavier, each flake like a silent accusation. I gripped the steering wheel, white-knuckled, the road stretching before me like a sentence with no end. In that moment, heartbreak turned into something else, something sharper. I didn't know what I would do yet. A man and a woman, bathrobes loose around their shoulders, steaming mugs in hand as though they owned the place. And in a way, one of them believed she did. "Dad," my daughter Kelly called out, her voice sharp, almost rehearsed. "You can't stay here. This isn't your house anymore." At first I laughed. It wasn't the kind of laughter that came from joy. It was the hollow chuckle of a man who thought surely he'd misheard. I picked up my bag, dragged it a few steps closer to the front door, and looked up at her. "Kelly, what are you talking about? Of course this is my house. Your mother and I chose every tile, every window, every piece of furniture in there. My name is on the deed." Her face hardened in a way I had never seen before, not even in her worst teenage years. "It belongs to Palmer's family now," she said, tilting her chin toward her husband, who shifted uncomfortably beside her. "We've already made the decision. You don't come here anymore. This place isn't yours." But one truth cut through the fog of grief as clearly as the lake's reflection. They had taken my home. They had dismissed my life's work, and sooner or later, they would learn the cost of betrayal. The drive back to San Diego felt endless. The highway stretched out like a wound that refused to close, each mile pulling me farther from the villa, from Elizabeth's memory, from the life I thought I still had. Snow gave way to rain, then to nothing but the gray monotony of asphalt. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I felt as though I'd aged 10 years in a single afternoon. Inside, the house was silent, too silent. I hung my coat on the same wooden rack Elizabeth had chosen from an antique shop decades ago. My fingers lingered on the hook, tracing the worn grooves where her scarves used to hang. For a moment, I could almost see her again, humming softly as she set the table, her laughter drifting through the rooms like sunlight. But she wasn't there. She hadn't been there for years. I lowered myself into her old recliner, the leather cracked and faded, but still carrying the faint impression of her frame. My body sank into the cushions, and suddenly the grief I'd been holding back hit me like a wave. My chest heaved, and I pressed the heels of my palms into my eyes, as if I could keep the tears from escaping. "Elizabeth," I whispered into the empty room, "what happened to our little girl?" The clock ticked in reply. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked. The world went on, as if nothing had shattered. I thought about Kelly as a child, how she used to curl up on this very chair with her mother, her hair in tangled braids, her voice bright as she read bedtime stories. I remembered the way she'd run to me after school, backpack bouncing, eyes wide with pride over every drawing, every grade. Back then, she believed I could fix anything, a broken toy, a scraped knee, even the monsters under her bed. But I couldn't fix this. My thoughts spiraled, darting between memory and betrayal. I kept asking myself what I'd done wrong. Had I spoiled her too much? Had I given her so much comfort that she never learned the value of sacrifice? Maybe Palmer saw the cracks I refused to see and slid right in, filling her head with promises of wealth and status. The ache in my chest deepened. I wasn't just grieving Elizabeth anymore. I was grieving the loss of Kelly, though she was still alive. Hours passed without me noticing. The daylight faded and the house sank into shadows. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I just sat there in the dark, listening to the silence. At some point, my hand drifted to the drawer in the side table. Inside lay the folder I'd avoided opening for years. Elizabeth's letters, her meticulous notes about our finances, reminders to take care of Kelly written in her elegant script. I pulled one out, unfolded it carefully, and let her handwriting pierce through the gloom. "Don't let the world harden you, but don't let it take advantage of you either." Her words struck me like a blade. That was Elizabeth, always gentle, but always firm. She had known the balance I never mastered. I gave everything, thinking love alone would protect us. But love without boundaries was nothing more than an invitation for betrayal. I sat up straighter, the fog of despair lifting just enough for something else to slip in. Resolve. If Elizabeth were here, she wouldn't tell me to collapse under the weight of Kelly's betrayal. She wouldn't want me to walk away quietly while others reaped what I had sown. No, she would want me to stand, to fight, to protect the legacy we had built together. I ran a hand over my face, exhaling slowly. My heart was still raw, my grief still sharp, but beneath it all, a spark began to glow. They thought I was finished. They thought age had dulled me, that grief had made me weak. But they had underestimated the man who had built an empire from nothing. That night, as the clock struck midnight, I made myself a silent promise. I would not let this betrayal define the rest of my life. I would not let my sacrifices be stolen by greed. For Kelly's sake, for Elizabeth's memory, and for my own dignity, I would fight back. And when the time came, they would learn that even the most patient man has a breaking point. A week passed after Kelly's words exiled me from the villa, but her voice still echoed in my skull every night. I kept replaying the scene, the balcony, the coffee mugs, the way she raised her cup like a toast to my absence. I tried to bury myself in routine, morning coffee, the property office, a few calls with old friends, but beneath it all was a gnawing question. Why? Why had my daughter turned on me so completely? The answer came sooner than I expected. One evening, I stopped by the office to retrieve some files I'd forgotten. The place was usually deserted after hours, but that night the hallway lights glowed and the faint sound of voices drifted from the conference room. I froze. Kelly's voice. I crept closer, each step measured, my heart pounding harder with every word I caught. Once we list the villa, we'll have more than enough for the down payment on the Newport property, she was saying, her tone brisk, businesslike. Palmer's parents already talked to a broker. They think it could go for $3 million, maybe more. My breath caught. Sell the villa? I pressed my back to the wall, listening. Palmer's voice followed, smooth and smug. Your father doesn't even use it anymore. It's wasted potential. Once the paperwork goes through, we can position it as a luxury rental until we flip it. Easy money. Kelly laughed. My daughter laughed. He won't even know what hit him. He's too sentimental, too stuck in the past. He'll sign whatever I put in front of him if I frame it as helping the family. The words sliced through me like a blade. My little girl, the one I had raised with love and sacrifice, was plotting against me, treating me not as her father, but as an obstacle. I gripped the doorframe, my hands trembling. The urge to storm in and confront them surged hot in my chest, but I forced myself to stay still, to breathe. Elizabeth's words came back to me from that letter. Don't let the world harden you, but don't let it take advantage of you either. I couldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Not yet. Instead, I slipped away, silent as a shadow, and returned to my office. I unlocked the filing cabinet and pulled out the villa's deed, the payment records, every scrap of documentation that proved the sacrifices I had made. I laid them across the desk under the harsh fluorescent light, the paper edges sharp against my fingers. For years, I had kept these documents out of habit, out of Elizabeth's meticulous sense of order. Now, they became my shield, my weapon. I spent hours that night digging through old boxes, finding receipts from the construction company, mortgage statements stamped, paid in full, photos of Elizabeth standing proudly in front of the villa the day we first bought it. Proof, evidence, a history they couldn't erase with their greed. By the time the sun began to rise, I had built a file thick enough to silence any lawyer Palmer's family could hire. But evidence wasn't enough. I knew that. They were cunning, willing to manipulate Kelly, willing to paint me as senile, unfit, outdated. If I wanted justice, I couldn't just defend myself. I had to strike first. That morning, as the first light spilled across my desk, I stared at the villa's deed and felt the fury settle into something sharper, colder. My daughter and her husband thought they could steal the legacy Elizabeth and I had built. They thought I was too tired, too soft, too blinded by love to fight back. They were wrong. Very soon, they would learn that the old man they dismissed still had plenty of fight left in him. After overhearing their plan, I didn't sleep much. My mind ran in circles, moving between anger and disbelief, grief and determination. But when the sun rose, the fog inside me cleared. I knew what had to be done. For decades, I had been the man who sacrificed, who bent over backward for everyone else. That part of me was gone now. What was left was someone Elizabeth would recognize, someone steady, calculating, unwilling to be pushed aside. I began with the paper trail. Every mortgage payment, every loan statement, every property tax receipt I had saved over the years. I pulled them out of storage and spread them across my dining room table. The surface quickly disappeared under piles of paper, a mosaic of sacrifice in black and white. There was the receipt from the down payment 20 years ago, my signature bold, steady. The closing document signed by Elizabeth and me, her handwriting neat beside mine. Utility bills addressed in my name, insurance policies listing me as the sole beneficiary. I hadn't realized how much of my life I had kept in folders and boxes until I saw it all at once. It wasn't clutter, it was proof. I bought a scanner and began digitizing everything. Page by page, hour after hour, I fed documents into the machine, creating a digital fortress they couldn't knock down. As I worked, I whispered to Elizabeth's picture on the mantel, "You were right to keep every receipt. You saved us even now." But paper wasn't enough. I needed expertise. That afternoon, I called David Tron, an old friend and attorney who had handled property disputes for half the city. When he picked up, his voice was warm but cautious. "Haven't heard from you in a while. What's going on?" I told him everything. The betrayal, the plan to sell the villa. I felt my knees weaken, as if the very foundation of the villa had given way beneath me. My own daughter, the little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, who cried on my shoulder the night we buried her mother, was looking at me like I was nothing more than an intruder. The leather handle of my bag slipped from my fingers. It landed on the stone walkway with a dull thud. "You're serious," I whispered. My voice cracked, betraying the storm of disbelief inside me. "You're actually serious." Kelly didn't blink. She pulled her bathrobe tighter, almost like she was shielding herself from me. The man who had worked 12-hour days for decades to build a life she never had to struggle for. Palmer kept his eyes on the horizon, cowardly, unwilling to meet my gaze. "Dad, don't make this harder than it has to be," she said coldly. "You hardly use this place anyway. They need it more than you do. So please just leave," I wanted to shout. My fear that Kelly had already been manipulated into signing things she didn't understand, or worse, fully intended to cut me out. There was a long pause on the other end. Finally, David sighed. "You did the right thing calling me. Family cases are messy, but the law is on your side. If you've got the documents, we can stop this cold." "I've got more than documents," I said, my voice harder than I expected. "I've got proof of every dime I ever put into that house, and I've got a recording." I told him about overhearing Kelly and Palmer at the office, how I had captured enough of their conversation to make their intent crystal clear. David whistled low. "That's gold. Don't let anyone near it. I'll draw up the filings. In the meantime, you keep gathering. Bank statements, tax returns, anything that ties your money to that villa. The more we have, the less they can wiggle." For the next week, I became a man possessed. I tore through filing cabinets, called banks for old statements, ordered transcripts of property tax payments. I even dug up Elizabeth's journals, where she'd written about the financial sacrifices we made, the overtime shifts, the vacations we skipped, the dreams we delayed to secure that villa. Each entry was a reminder. This wasn't just about money, it was about a legacy, a lifetime. The more evidence I collected, the angrier I became, not at myself, not even at Kelly, but at Palmer. He had wormed his way into her mind, turning her against her own blood. And she, blinded by his charm, had let him. But anger alone doesn't win battles. Evidence does, strategy does. By the end of the week, I had 3 thick binders filled with organized records, one for financial documents, one for ownership proof, and one for what David called narrative evidence. Photos, journals, letters. Proof not just of legality, but of history, of belonging. I remember standing over those binders late one night, the lamp casting long shadows across the room. My reflection stared back at me from the glass of Elizabeth's framed photo. My eyes were tired but sharper than they had been in years. "This is for you," I told her. "They think they can erase what we built, but I won't let them." The plan was taking shape. I had the evidence. I had the lawyer. Soon, I would have the opportunity. And when the moment came, I would be ready to put everything in front of the world and let the truth crush their lies. I thought I was prepared. I had my binders, my lawyer, my evidence lined up like soldiers on a battlefield. But I hadn't counted on how quickly Palmer would strike back, or how low he would go. It started with whispers. A neighbor I'd known for 20 years pulled me aside after church. Her smile was polite, but her eyes were probing. "Are you doing all right? I heard you've been forgetful lately, misplacing things, getting confused." I stared at her, stunned. "Where did you hear that?" She shifted uncomfortably. "Oh, you know how people talk? Kelly mentioned you've been under stress. She just worries about you, that's all." My chest tightened. Worry. That was the word they were using. Concern. The mask of care hiding the knife of betrayal. By the end of the week, the whispers had turned into conversations. Old colleagues called to check in, their tone laced with pity. A friend at the bank hinted that Kelly had asked about power of attorney, just in case I couldn't keep up with responsibilities. It was Palmer's doing. I could smell his hand in it. He was painting me as senile, unfit to manage my own affairs. And Kelly, she was letting him. Maybe even helping him. The worst blow came when my own doctor's office called. "Mr. Dawson, your daughter asked if we could send her copies of your medical records. She said she's helping manage your care." I gripped the phone so tightly I thought it might crack. "You will do no such thing," I snapped. "My care is my business and no one else's." But the damage was already done. I began to notice the looks everywhere I went. Sympathetic smiles that weren't really sympathy at all, but judgment. A cashier who spoke to me slower than usual. A neighbor who offered to help me carry groceries when I was perfectly capable. The world was starting to believe the story Palmer wanted them to believe. Even David, my lawyer, frowned when I told him. "They're playing dirty," he said, tapping his pen against his desk. "If they can establish even a sliver of doubt about your competence, they'll try to have you declared unfit. That would hand them the villa without a fight." I felt the blood drain from my face. Declared unfit. The word tasted poisonous. "No," I said firmly, slamming my palm on the desk. "They won't take my dignity, David. They won't turn me into some helpless old man just because it suits their greed." But that night, alone in my house, doubt crept in. I caught myself forgetting where I'd left my reading glasses, searching the kitchen for my keys, losing my train of thought mid-sentence. Ordinary slips, the kind that come with age, but now they felt like cracks widening under pressure. Palmer's voice haunted me. Maybe it's time the house reflects the family. His definition of family didn't include me. I stared at Elizabeth's photo on the mantel. She had always been the steady one, the anchor. "What would you say now?" I asked the picture, my voice breaking. "Would you tell me I'm losing it? Would you believe them?" Her silence cut deeper than any answer. For a moment, I felt myself faltering. Maybe it would be easier to let it go, to walk away from the villa, from the fight, from the humiliation. I was tired. God, I was so tired. But then I remembered that night in the office, hearing Kelly laugh about how I'd sign anything if she framed it as helping the family. The contempt in her voice, the smugness in Palmer's. That wasn't concern. That was exploitation. And I was done being their victim. The smear campaign might have shaken me, but it also hardened me. If they wanted to portray me as weak, then I would show them strength. If they wanted to prove I was incompetent, then I would demonstrate clarity sharper than theirs. The next morning, I called David. "Draw up whatever I need, evaluations, witnesses, whatever it takes. If they want to put me on trial as an old fool, then let them. I'll bury them in truth." Because here's what they didn't understand. Whispers can spread, but evidence speaks louder. And I had evidence. The smear campaign had rattled me, but it hadn't broken me. If anything, it had stripped away the last illusions I'd been clinging to. That Kelly was just misguided, that Palmer was simply careless, that this nightmare would resolve itself with time. No. This was a war, and they had drawn the first blood. I sat at my dining room table, the binders of evidence spread open before me, pages upon pages of mortgage statements, tax receipts, closing documents, all staring back at me like soldiers ready for battle. Elizabeth's picture rested at the center, her smile soft but unyielding, as if reminding me who I was. For days I had allowed grief and doubt to cloud me. I had replayed the betrayal on the balcony, the laughter, the whispers in the office. But now, those memories no longer made me crumble. They hardened me. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, sat down, and spoke aloud to the empty room. They want to paint me as weak. They think I'll roll over. They're wrong. The words carried weight. For the first time in weeks, my voice didn't shake. That morning, I called David again. When he answered, I didn't waste time. "Draw up the paperwork," I said. "I'm moving forward. I want legal action. I want injunctions, freezes, whatever tools you've got. They won't sell that villa. Not now, not ever." David's tone was steady, but approving. "That's the man I remember. All right. We'll start with a restraining order on any property transfers. Then we'll prepare for a competency challenge, just in case they push it. You're ready for that? Yes, I said firmly. I'll take every evaluation, every test. Let them try to prove I'm unfit. They'll choke on the results. After the call, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom. The man staring back at me had aged, lines deeper, hair thinner, but there was steel in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Elizabeth used to tease me about that look, the one I got when I was closing a deal or negotiating with a contractor. You look like you're ready to move mountains, she'd say. Well, this time, I wasn't moving mountains. I was tearing down walls, the walls Palmer had built between me and my daughter, between me and my legacy. I began to map out a strategy. Step 1, protect the villa legally. Step 2, gather not just documents, but witnesses, old friends, contractors, bankers, anyone who could testify to the truth. Step 3, prepare for the inevitable confrontation. Because I knew Palmer wouldn't back down quietly. The more I thought, the colder I became. Emotion had ruled me long enough. Love for Kelly, grief for Elizabeth, the sting of betrayal, they had clouded my judgment. Now, I had to think like a strategist, not a father. They mistake my kindness for weakness, I murmured, echoing a truth I had ignored too long. But kindness has limits, and mine just ran out. That night, I sat at Elizabeth's old writing desk, the one she had used for thank you notes and holiday letters. I pulled out a clean sheet of paper and wrote something I hadn't dared before. Plan for villa, reclamation strategy. The words looked strange, almost clinical, but they steadied me. I listed tasks beneath it. Secure injunction. I wanted to remind her of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dollar earned and spent for her future, but instead, a strange calm settled over me. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the last remnant of dignity I had left. Fine, I said quietly, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. If that's what you want. I bent down, my knees aching as I lifted the bag again. The villa loomed behind them, golden in the late afternoon sun. For 30 years, it had been my refuge, the symbol of everything I had built from nothing. Now, it had become a fortress I was exiled from, guarded not by strangers, but by my own blood. As I turned back toward my car, I caught a glimpse of Kelly raising her coffee mug to Palmer, as if toasting to her victory. The sight cut deeper than any blade. I walked slowly, each step heavier than the last. My heart pounded in my chest, not with anger, but with the hollow ache of betrayal. Collect financial statements. Request cognitive evaluation. Interview witnesses, or prepare evidence packets. By the time I finished, the page was full, my handwriting tight and sharp. It wasn't just a plan, it was a declaration. I leaned back in the chair, exhausted but satisfied. For weeks, I had been drowning in heartbreak. Tonight, for the first time, I felt like I was swimming towards something. Palmer thought he was clever. Kelly thought she could manipulate me with guilt. But they didn't know the man who had built this life from the ground up. The man who had faced down banks, contractors, recessions, and still prevailed. I wasn't just a grieving widower anymore. I wasn't just a father clinging to memories. I was a strategist now. And the war for my legacy had officially begun. Once I made the decision, the weight on my chest shifted. It didn't disappear. Grief never does. But it transformed into something sharper, something I could wield. For the first time since Kelly had banished me from the villa, I felt in control. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about rage. Rage burns too hot, too fast. Revenge was patience. It was strategy. It was laying the groundwork so that when the moment came, the enemy didn't even realize the walls were already closing in. I started with the finances. For years, I had been the silent benefactor behind Kelly's life. The mortgage payments on her first house, the tuition checks, the emergency transfers she swore were temporary. I never asked for repayment. I never even demanded gratitude. But all of it had one thing in common. The money flowed through accounts only I controlled. That night, I logged into my online banking, scrolling through a history of sacrifices. My finger hovered over the transfer buttons, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt resolve. I shut it all off. The automatic payments I'd been covering for Kelly's credit cards, gone. The monthly deposit into the joint account she'd insisted was just in case, gone. Even the contributions toward Palmer's laughable business venture terminated with a single click. As I closed the laptop, I exhaled. Cutting them off wasn't spite, it was justice. If they wanted independence, they'd have it in full measure. Next came the legal trap. David filed the injunction on the villa within days. It froze any attempt to sell or transfer the property, locking it firmly in place until the courts could examine the evidence. Palmer didn't know it yet, but his grand scheme had already hit a wall. I sat in David's office as he explained the paperwork. "This buys us time," he said. "They'll try to fight it, of course. But with the documents you've given me, we'll hold them off." I nodded. "Time is all I need. They've been sloppy, overconfident. They think I'm blind. That's their mistake." He studied me for a moment, then smiled faintly. "You've changed. A month ago, you were broken. Now you sound like a general planning a campaign." "Maybe that's what I am," I replied. "This isn't just a family dispute anymore. It's a war for my life's work." Outside the office, I moved quietly, deliberately. I didn't argue with Kelly when she called, her voice syrupy with false concern. I didn't rise to Palmer's bait when he sent smug emails about family harmony. I responded politely, vaguely, as though I were too distracted to notice their schemes. All the while, I was collecting. I reached out to the contractor who had built the villa's foundation, a man now in his 70s who remembered every beam and brick. He agreed to sign an affidavit confirming that I alone had commissioned the work, that Palmer's family had never been involved. I contacted the bank manager who had overseen my loans, securing certified records of every payment I had made over 2 decades. I even tracked down old photographs of Elizabeth and me standing in front of the villa, her smile radiant, my arm around her shoulders. Proof not just of ownership, but of legacy. Piece by piece, I was building a fortress. At night, I rehearsed in my mind the confrontation I knew was coming. I imagined Palmer's smug expression fading as I laid the evidence before him, Kelly's face crumbling when she realized her husband had led her into disaster. I didn't relish the image. It didn't bring me joy, but it brought me peace. This wasn't about humiliating them. It was about restoring balance. They had crossed a line, and now they would learn that every action has consequences. Before bed one night, I opened Elizabeth's journal, the one where she had scribbled her hopes for Kelly's future. One entry caught my eye. "Promise me she'll always know where she came from." I closed the book gently and whispered, "She will. One way or another, she will." By the time I turned off the light, the plan was clear. The financial support was gone. The legal walls were closing in. The evidence was secured. Now, all that remained was timing. And when the right moment came, my trap would spring shut, swift, undeniable, and final. It didn't take long for the silence of my withdrawal to echo in their lives. For years, Kelly and Palmer had lived on a cushion they didn't even realize existed, my money. When that cushion vanished, the ground beneath them began to shake. The first sign came in the form of a phone call. "Dad," Kelly said, her voice tight but trying to sound casual. "Did something happen with the joint account? I tried to use the card yesterday and it was declined." I let the pause hang. "Yes," I said evenly. "I closed it." Her breath caught on the other end. "Closed it? Why would you do that?" "That was for emergencies." "Emergencies," I repeated. "Kelly, paying for Palmer's golf membership isn't an emergency. Covering your shopping sprees isn't an emergency. You wanted independence. You have it now." She sputtered, searching for words. The gravel crunched under my shoes, echoing like accusations in the cold mountain air. By the time I slid into the driver's seat, my hands were trembling so violently I could barely fit the key into the ignition. I looked up one last time at the balcony. Kelly had already turned away, laughing softly at something Palmer whispered. In that moment, I realized something terrible. I wasn't just unwelcome in my own home. I was no longer a father in her eyes. And as the engine roared to life, one thought burned brighter than all the rest. They thought they had stripped me of everything, but they had forgotten one thing. What I build, I can also take away. As I drove away from the villa that day, the mountain roads blurred into a haze of snow and grief. My daughter's voice echoed in my mind like a hammer striking an anvil. "This isn't your house anymore." It felt surreal. That house wasn't just real estate. It was the culmination of decades of sacrifice. I could almost hear Palmer in the background, coaching her, his voice muffled but urgent. Finally, she said, "We'll talk later," and hung up. That was the beginning. Over the next week, the calls multiplied. The mortgage company, the car lease office, even the country club Palmer loved so much. Without my quiet deposits, their perfect little world began to wobble. David kept me updated too. They've been sniffing around, asking about loopholes in the injunction, he told me one morning. Sounds like Palmer's getting desperate. I pictured him pacing their living room, the confidence slipping from his smug smile. For once, it wasn't me losing sleep. It was him. Kelly tried again a few days later, this time her tone softer, almost pleading. Dad, maybe we overreacted. Maybe we said things we shouldn't have, but you can't just cut us off completely. We have bills, responsibilities. I cut her off. So did I for 40 years. I handled them. So did your mother. You can too. There was silence. Then, more faint than before, Palmer's voice in the background. Don't beg, just push him. Kelly's tone hardened. Fine, but this isn't over. She slammed the phone down. I sat there staring at the receiver, my hand steady. It wasn't joy I felt. It was justice. For once, they were carrying the weight of their own choices. News of their struggles began to spread. A neighbor mentioned that Palmer's car had been repossessed after missed payments. An old friend of Kelly's confided that she'd tried borrowing money, blaming me for being stingy. Each story was another crack in the image they had built. And yet, despite the pressure, Kelly clung to Palmer. I saw it in her eyes the one time we crossed paths at the grocery store. She avoided me at first, but when our carts collided in the aisle, she froze. Her face was pale, tired, but she stood a little closer to him, as though his presence still shielded her. Dad, she said stiffly, we don't need your charity. We'll figure it out. Palmer smirked, though his eyes darted nervously. Yeah, old man, we're fine. Don't flatter yourself thinking we rely on you. I didn't respond. I just looked at them, really looked, and saw the truth beneath the bravado. Kelly's hands fidgeting with her purse strap, Palmer's jaw tight, his smile forced. They were unraveling. When I got home, I sat in Elizabeth's chair and let the moment replay in my mind. For years, I had carried them, feeding their arrogance with my silence. Now, stripped of my support, they were exposed for what they really were, fragile, dependent, hollow. But I wasn't done, not yet. The financial strain was only the beginning. I still had the binders, the evidence, the legal arsenal ready to fire. They thought they could break me with whispers and lies. Instead, I had turned the pressure back on them, and soon the cracks in their armor would widen until everything they had built on my sacrifice collapsed. For the first time in a long while, I felt calm. Not because I enjoyed their suffering, but because justice was finally taking shape. And justice, once set in motion, doesn't stop. By the time Palmer's car was repossessed and Kelly had started dodging creditors, I knew the pressure was working, but pressure alone wasn't enough. If I wanted this battle to end, I needed more than silent victories. I needed the truth out in the open, undeniable, laid bare for everyone to see. That's when the idea of the case file came to me. One evening, I sat at my desk, the binders of evidence open before me, page after page of proof, mortgage statements, closing documents, tax records, even Elizabeth's handwritten notes about the villa. It wasn't just paperwork. It was history, legacy, sacrifice carved into ink and paper. But a binder in my study wouldn't change anything. Palmer was cunning, Kelly was stubborn, and their story had already begun to seep into the community. If I wanted to shatter their lies, I had to drag everything into the light, publicly. I thought of family gatherings, of birthdays and holidays, when the villa was once alive with laughter. I thought of how betrayal flourished in shadows, but truth thrived in daylight. The plan began to crystallize, a gathering, a moment when they couldn't hide, when every witness they cared about would see the truth. I would turn a dinner table into a courtroom. The next day I visited a local print shop. The young clerk raised her eyebrows as I handed her a flash drive. 24 copies, I said. Bound, tabbed, everything in order. She slid the drive into her computer. Looks like a legal brief, she said, half joking. It is, I replied, just not in a courtroom. Hours later, I carried out a box heavy with fresh copies, each one a complete dossier of their betrayal. On the cover, in bold letters, I had written, Villa Dawson, a record of ownership and sacrifice. At home, I laid them out on the dining room table, 24 thick spiral-bound packets, identical and unshakable. I imagined the scene, Palmer reaching for one, his smirk faltering as he flipped through undeniable proof. Kelly's face paling as she realized every guest, every relative, every family friend could see the truth with their own eyes. I rehearsed my words in the mirror, calm, steady, precise. No shouting, no theatrics. The evidence would speak louder than rage ever could. "Ladies and gentlemen," I murmured to my reflection, "I've been accused of being senile, of being weak, of clinging to something that isn't mine. Tonight, you will see the truth. Not my opinion, not hearsay, the truth." The speech felt foreign at first, but as I repeated it, my voice grew steadier. This wasn't just about proving ownership. It was about reclaiming dignity, about showing the world I wasn't the frail old man Palmer painted me to be. I circled the date on my calendar, Thanksgiving, a holiday about gratitude, family, and heritage. The irony wasn't lost on me. If Kelly and Palmer wanted to rewrite history, I would confront them in front of the very people who knew our history best. In the weeks leading up to it, I worked quietly, methodically. I called relatives, inviting them personally. "It's been too long," I told them. "Let's gather at the villa." I didn't mention the case file. That part would remain a surprise. Meanwhile, David fine-tuned the legal angles. "If you present the evidence publicly," he warned, "expect a backlash. They'll accuse you of humiliation tactics. But if your goal is to shake their credibility, this will do it." "That's exactly the goal," I said. On the eve of Thanksgiving, I sat alone at the dining table once more, the case files stacked neatly in a leather satchel. The house was quiet, but inside me, the storm had calmed. I felt like a man sharpening his sword the night before battle, every detail prepared, every edge honed. I looked again at Elizabeth's picture on the mantel. "Tomorrow," I whispered, "they'll finally see who we really are, what we built, what cannot be stolen." And for the first time in months, I slept soundly. Thanksgiving arrived with a chill in the air and tension humming beneath my skin. For the first time in years, the villa's driveway was packed with cars again. Uncles, cousins, old family friends. They all came, lured by the promise of a holiday meal and the hope of togetherness. None of them knew that tonight would be anything but ordinary. I pulled into the driveway last, leather satchel resting on the seat beside me. Inside were the case files, 24 identical packets, each one a dagger wrapped in paper. I sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, steadying my breath. This is it, I told myself. No more whispers. No more shadows. When I entered, the house buzzed with laughter, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon drifting through the air. For a fleeting second, I almost wished it could have been what it appeared to be, a family holiday, warm and safe. But then I saw Kelly and Palmer standing near the fireplace, greeting guests like the king and queen of a kingdom they hadn't built. Palmer's arm draped over her shoulders, his grin smug as ever. I set the satchel on the dining table and waited. Dinner began as expected. Small talk, stories, children darting between chairs. Kelly gave a little toast, thanking everyone for coming. She didn't mention me once, though it was my villa, my table, my wine poured into their glasses. When the plates had been cleared, I rose to my feet. The room quieted. All eyes turned to me, some surprised. I hadn't spoken much in months. "Before we end tonight," I began, my voice steady, "there's something I need to share with all of you. It won't take long, but it's important." Kelly shifted uneasily, shooting Palmer a glance. He frowned but kept silent. I reached into the satchel and pulled out the stack of case files. Gasps rippled as I began handing them out, one by one, around the table. The rustle of pages filled the room as curious eyes scanned bold headings, stamped documents, photographs. "What is this?" one cousin asked, flipping through the binder. "Evidence," I said simply. "Proof of who owns this villa, proof of the sacrifices made to build it, proof of what's been hidden from you." Kelly's face drained of color. "Dad, what are you doing?" "Showing the truth," I replied, my voice sharp as a blade. Palmer grabbed a packet, flipping through furiously, his jaw tightening with every page. Mortgage receipts, tax records, bank transfers, every detail meticulously organized. His smirk vanished, replaced with a pinched, desperate expression. This is unnecessary," he stammered. "Family matters shouldn't be aired like this." "Family matters?" I cut him off. "You plotted to sell this home behind my back." Every paycheck, every overtime shift, every dollar saved had been poured into building a life for my family, And Kelly was supposed to be the heart of that life. I still remember the beginning, back when my wife, Elizabeth, and I were just two dreamers with nothing but a tiny apartment and an old Chevy that broke down every other month. She believed in me when nobody else did. She used to pack my lunch in brown paper bags, slipping handwritten notes inside. "Keep going, I believe in you." I would pull those notes out at construction sites, grease-stained and exhausted, and somehow find the strength to keep working. While other men my age spent weekends fishing or watching football, I spent mine hauling lumber, laying concrete, and calculating interest rates on properties I could barely afford. Every sacrifice had a purpose, a better life for Elizabeth and for the daughter we prayed for. You whispered lies about my health, tried to paint me as senile. You told people I was unfit to manage what I built. That ends tonight. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on us. Even the children stopped fidgeting, sensing the gravity. Kelly's lips trembled. "Dad, please, you're humiliating us." "No, Kelly," I said, my voice breaking but firm. "You humiliated yourself when you let greed blind you. When you forgot the nights your mother and I went without, so you could have everything. When you raised a glass to my absence on that balcony." Her eyes widened, tears brimming. Palmer slammed the packet shut. "This proves nothing. Anyone can forge documents." David, my lawyer, rose from his chair at the far end of the table. He had been waiting silently, his presence unnoticed until now. "Everything you're looking at has been verified by the county clerk's office and notarized. It's indisputable." The room erupted in murmurs. Family friends leaned over their packets, whispering, pointing at signatures, photographs. The tide was shifting. I looked directly at Kelly, my voice soft now. "This was never just about a house. It was about respect, about legacy, about remembering where you came from. And tonight, everyone here will know the truth." Tears spilled down her cheeks. Palmer reached for her arm, but she pulled away, staring at the floor. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The battle wasn't over, but the silence was broken. Their lies had been dragged into the light, and once truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. I sat down, my hands steady on the table. Around me, the rustle of papers continued, the sound of justice unfolding one page at a time. The room had fallen into a stunned hush, broken only by the whisper of turning pages. My evidence lay open in front of every relative, every family friend, every witness I had chosen for this night. For once, the truth was louder than Palmer's charm, stronger than Kelly's silence. Palmer was the first to crack. "This is ridiculous," he spat, his voice rising an octave. His hand trembled as he shoved the binder across the table. "He's manipulating all of you. Old receipts, dusty records. What do they prove? That he used to own the place? That doesn't mean it's his now." His desperation rang through every word. He was no longer the smug son-in-law with the perfect grin. His face was flushed, his collar damp with sweat. I could see the fear bleeding through his bravado. I leaned forward, my voice calm, deliberate. "It proves every brick, every beam, every square foot of this villa was paid for by me. Not you, not your family, me. And now everyone here knows it." Gasps and murmurs rippled across the table. Some of my cousins shook their heads in disgust. An uncle muttered under his breath, "Shameful." Palmer turned to Kelly, his mask cracking. "Say something! Don't just sit there." But Kelly didn't meet his eyes. Her hands shook as she clutched the binder, her tears dripping onto the pages. Finally, she looked at me. "Dad." Her voice was broken, a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." My chest tightened. For a flicker of a moment, I saw my little girl again, the one who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms, who once swore she'd make me proud. But the image dissolved under the weight of her betrayal. "Yes, you did," I said softly, though the words cut like steel. "You meant every word on that balcony. You meant every laugh when you planned to sell this house. You may regret it now, but don't you dare pretend it wasn't real." She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Palmer, cornered, slammed his fist against the table. "This doesn't change anything. You think humiliating us makes you a hero? You're nothing but a bitter old man clinging to the past. Without us, your daughter has nothing. And without her, you'll die alone." I stood, my chair scraping back across the floor, and the room froze. My voice was low, controlled, every word deliberate. "No, Palmer. Without me, you are nothing. Without me, this house doesn't exist. Without me, Kelly wouldn't have had the life she did. And now everyone knows it. You wanted to steal my legacy, but you've only exposed yourself as a parasite." He faltered, his lips trembling. The silence that followed wasn't mine. It was the room's. Judgment was already written in the eyes of every person seated at that table. Palmer wasn't just defeated, he was disgraced. Kelly wept openly now, her shoulders shaking. She whispered through her tears, "I'm sorry, Dad. I thought I was protecting us. I cut her off gently, but firmly. "You thought wrong. You chose greed over family. You chose his lies over my love. And tonight, you live with the consequences." I let the weight of my words linger. Then I gathered the satchel, slid the remaining binders back inside, and looked around the table. "This was never about revenge," I said, my voice steady. "It was about truth, about dignity, about making sure no one, family or not, steals what was earned with blood and sacrifice." Palmer slumped in his chair, pale and speechless. Kelly's sobs were the only sound in the room as I turned toward the door. I paused once, glancing back, my eyes locking on hers. "When you're ready to remember who you are, my door is open. But until then, you'll find out how hard life feels without the man you thought was in your way." And with that, I left them, Palmer broken, Kelly in tears, the villa echoing not with their victory, but with the sound of their collapse. The weeks after Thanksgiving felt strangely quiet. Word of what happened at the villa spread faster than I expected. Family members called me privately, some in tears, others in anger, not at me, but at Kelly and Palmer. Kelly. The truth had been seen, and once seen, it couldn't be unseen. But truth wasn't enough on its own. I needed it written in law, carved into stone, beyond anyone's ability to twist. When the court date arrived, I walked into the courthouse with David at my side. Kelly and Palmer sat across the aisle, their lawyer whispering frantically to them. Kelly's face was pale, streaked with exhaustion. Palmer, though dressed in his finest suit, couldn't hide the twitch of his jaw, the nervous drumming of his fingers against the table. The judge reviewed the binders, the documents, the notarized records. Page after page confirmed what I had always known. The villa belonged to me and me alone. The smear campaign about my competence dissolved when the court-appointed psychologist testified to my clarity and stability. At the end, the judge's words rang like a bell. "The property in question remains the sole and uncontested asset of Mr. Dawson. No transfers, no claims, no disputes hold legal weight." It was over. I felt no triumph, no surge of joy, just relief, like exhaling after holding my breath for months. The villa was safe. Elizabeth's memory was safe. My legacy was safe. Outside the courthouse, Kelly caught up to me. Her eyes were red, her voice trembling. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know Palmer was—" I raised a hand, stopping her. "Don't lie to me, Kelly. You knew. Maybe not all of it, but enough." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I thought I was protecting us. I thought he was looking out for our future." I shook my head. A future built on betrayal isn't a future at all. For a long moment, we just stood there, the city noise swirling around us. She looked like the little girl I once carried on my shoulders, the one who used to whisper promises of making me proud. But I wasn't the same man, and she wasn't the same girl. "I can forgive you," I said finally, my voice low. "But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You and Palmer will have to live with the choices you made." Her shoulders sagged as if the weight of it finally settled. She nodded weakly, then turned back to where Palmer was waiting, his eyes dark with resentment. I didn't follow. Weeks later, I returned to the villa. Snow blanketed the roof, and the lake shimmered in the winter light. I walked through the rooms slowly, running my hand along the wooden beams, the lavender curtains Elizabeth had loved, the photographs still lining the walls. For the first time in months, the silence didn't ache. It soothed. I lit a fire in the hearth and sat in my chair, the crackle of flames filling the room. For the first time, I wasn't haunted by Kelly's betrayal or Palmer's arrogance. I felt peace, not because everything was perfect, but because I had drawn a boundary. Elizabeth's photo sat on the mantel, her smile catching the glow of the firelight. "It's safe," I whispered. "They can't take it from us." The fight had cost me, yes. It had carved scars I would carry forever. But it also gave me something I hadn't felt in years. Dignity, clarity, the strength to live not as a victim, but as a man who had defended what was his. I leaned back, letting the warmth wash over me. Kelly might one day find her way back, or she might not. Either way, I had made peace with it. My door would be open, but my boundaries would never crumble again. Justice had been served, not just in court, but in my heart, and for the first time since Elizabeth's passing, I felt ready to live again. Winter lingered in the mountains that year, the lake half frozen, the trees stripped bare. I spent more time at the villa than I had in years, not because I feared losing it anymore, but because I had reclaimed it, not just on paper, but in spirit. When Kelly was born, and I first held her in my calloused hands, I swore silently to God that she would never know the hunger or uncertainty I had grown up with. I worked 12, sometimes 14 hours a day. My back ached, my hands cracked, but I kept pushing. When other fathers were at the park, I was chasing contracts. When families took vacations, I was paying down mortgages. Elizabeth never complained. She kept the house warm, raised Kelly with grace, and reminded me that the struggle was temporary, that one day our daughter would inherit a world built on our sweat and love. I thought it was working. Kelly never missed a school play, a piano recital, or a single opportunity for a better education. I made sure of it. I still remember standing outside her college dorm, pretending to be strong while my heart ached. She hugged me and said, "Dad, I'll make you proud." Those words carried me through the lonely years after Elizabeth passed. Each room carried echoes of the past, but they no longer haunted me. Instead, they reminded me of who I was, of who Elizabeth had helped me become. She had always seen me clearer than anyone, always told me I was stronger than I believed. One evening, as I stood on the balcony where Kelly once raised her glass to my absence, I felt Elizabeth's presence more than ever. The air was cold, but the fire inside me was steady. I spoke softly, almost afraid to break the stillness. "They tried to take what we built, but I didn't let them. I hope I did right by you." The wind carried no reply, yet I felt something settle in my chest, a quiet assurance. I often wondered if Kelly would call, if one day she'd appear at the door, contrition in her eyes. Part of me still hoped she would, part of me always would, but I no longer let that hope define me. Love without boundaries had nearly destroyed me once. I wouldn't let it again. The greatest lesson I learned through all this wasn't about property or law. It was about dignity, about drawing lines even with the people you love most, especially with them. Because when family forgets the value of sacrifice, when they mistake kindness for weakness, boundaries become the only language left. I thought back to Elizabeth's words in her journal. "Don't let the world harden you, but don't let it take advantage of you either." That balance was hard won. I had spent a lifetime giving, bending, sacrificing. This time, I had stood firm. And in standing firm, I hadn't just saved the villa, I had saved myself. Now, when I sit by the fire with a glass of wine, I no longer feel bitterness gnawing at me. I feel gratitude. Gratitude that I found the strength to fight back. Gratitude that truth prevailed. Gratitude that I still carry Elizabeth's wisdom like a compass guiding me forward. If there is one thing I want others to know from my story, it's this. You cannot always choose what people do to you, even those closest to you, but you can choose how you respond. You can choose to stand. The villa remains mine, yes. But more importantly, my dignity remains mine. My peace remains mine. And those are worth more than any property, any inheritance, any fleeting approval. As the fire crackles and the night deepens, I lift my glass to the empty chair across from me, the chair Elizabeth once filled. "We kept it safe," I whisper. And in the silence that follows, I finally feel whole again. When Elizabeth died, it was as if the sun went out. For weeks I would sit in her recliner just to feel the faint impression she'd left on the cushions. Kelly was broken too. I remember holding her in my arms at the funeral, her body trembling against mine. She was 25, but in that moment, she was my little girl again, crying into my chest just like when she was 5. I promised her I would be strong for both of us. That was when I started taking her to the villa more often. I thought being there, surrounded by the memories of her mother, would help her heal, and for a while, it did. She laughed again. We cooked her mother's recipes together, burned the garlic bread a few times, and ended the nights with cocoa by the fire. I thought we were closer than ever. But slowly, things changed. Palmer entered her life, and with him came an invisible wall. At first I welcomed him. I wanted to see Kelly happy, wanted her to feel secure with someone by her side. But soon, he started making little comments about money, about old-fashioned ways of doing things. He looked at my hard-earned villa not as a family treasure, but as an opportunity. I should have seen the signs. The way Kelly deferred to him in every decision. The way he'd wander around the villa like he was appraising it for resale. The way her laughter grew sharper, less like Elizabeth's and more like his smug tone. Still, I told myself she was grieving, adapting, trying to find her own way. I ignored the unease that coiled in my gut every time Palmer joked about inheritance, or hinted that maybe I was getting too old to manage my assets. I wanted to believe in my daughter's goodness. I wanted to believe she remembered the decades of sweat and sacrifice that built her world. But sitting in that car after she banished me from my own home, I realized something painful. Sacrifice means nothing to those who never had to make it.